Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Berechot, chapter 2, Halacha 7, and we were just talking about with a wedding and happier things and about concentration for the Shema, and now we're going to get to the other side, which is when you have a loss. So the Mishneh starts off talking about Rabban Gamliel, and Rabban Gamliel washed on the first night after his wife died. That's how the Mishnah starts. And basically the Rambam's pointing out in the Rambam commentary in the Mishnah that he washed all or part of his body in hot water, or he washed his entire body in cold water, and both of which are going to be forbidden to a mourner. So question is, what's happening here? And the Rosh Cirilio points out that this washing took place on the night following the day of his wife's burial. And since there's a prohibition on a mourner to bathe, and it happens with the burial, the question is, what happened? Now, this is going to be a case where the students are going to be asking whether he's permitted to wash at that point or not. And the Mishnah continues and says that his students said to him, "You have taught us, our teacher, that a mourner is prohibited to wash. And he said to them, I am not like all other people for whom washing during mourning is prohibited, for I am of a delicate nature." Basically, what he's saying here, says the Haredim, is that Rabban Gamliel did not wash for pleasure, but to alleviate his discomfort, which comes about because he's a very delicate nature and at this point very old. And as we will explain coming up, Rabban Gamliel holds that the prohibition to wash on the night following the burial, as well as the other days of mourning, is a rabbinic decree which is directed at those who want to wash for pleasure. But in the case of somebody who's a delicate nature, a delicate person, and maybe he has a lot of skin problems, that person is not washing for pleasure, but to alleviate discomfort. And basically, he's already going to be under emotional discomfort and spiritual discomfort. And then he's also, this is a case where somebody's also under physical discomfort from perhaps skin problems or something like that. And it's to alleviate that burden. So that's going to be what we're talking about. And the Mishnah is basically going to be pointing out that we know that in a basic normal way, a mourner is not supposed to wash. Now, the Gemara is going to comment and say that, Gemara says, who is the Tana who taught that a mourner is prohibited to wash throughout the 7 days of mourning, even a single time following the burial? It is Rabbi Nassan, who disputes with the sages in this issue. So I want to point out something that the Haredim is going to be explaining on this. The Haredim says that the Gemara coming up is going to cite a Beraisa that states that despite the general prohibition for a mourner to wash, he is permitted to wash a single time immediately after the burial. However, from the student's comments to Rabban Gamliel, which draws no distinction between the first washing and all subsequent washing, it is clear that they prohibit even this single washing. And the Gemara is aware that this is a matter of Tanaic dispute, and it identifies Rabbi Nassan as the one who prohibits washing throughout the 7 days, even following burial. So that's going to be part of what's going on here. And the Rosh Cirilio says that some explain that the dispute between Rabbi Nassan and his other disputants concerns a prohibition to wash during the 7 days of mourning, and from the Mishnah it's clear that washing is prohibited throughout the 7 days. Others maintain, says Rosh Cirilio, that a mourner is permitted to wash during the 7 days of mourning. And the Gemara is identifying this Tana who prohibits the washing as Rabbi Natan. So that's going to be what's going on. This is a Tanaic dispute. And again, we're not talking about what is the halacha lemaisa. If you want to know the halacha lemaisa, always check with the Shulchan Aruch and ask your rabbi. The Gemara recounts an incident now into which a ruling was issued regarding this matter. And the Gemara says that an incident occurred with Rabbi Ami in which a close family member died and he became a mourner. And he asked Rabbi Chia Barba whether a mourner may wash immediately after the burial. And Rabbi Chia Barba ruled for him that washing is prohibited throughout the 7 days of mourning in accordance with the view of Rabbi Nassan. So the Haredim points out that what's happening here is that Rabbi Ami is uncertain whether we rule in accordance with the sages, since they are in the majority, or we rule in accordance with Rabbi Nassan, since his view is stated anonymously in our Mishneh, and the halacha generally follows the anonymous ruling of the Mishneh. So why is this in here? This is in here because the anonymous Mishneh here is in the name of Rabbi Nassan. So what do you do here? Are you going to follow the majority, or are you going to follow the view of the minority who is in dissent and is also the anonymous Mishneh? Now, this, as it stands now, is a very unusual Mishneh and a very unusual case because of that structure. That doesn't happen very often, but it is happening here, and it's something that is very interesting for people who are really interested in getting into the guts of a ruling and the guts of an idea, a Torah idea, and trying to come up with how the halacha lemaisa would ultimately come to be. So the Gemara now is going to record a discussion concerning the ruling, and the Gemara says that an incident occurred with Rabbi Yosei in which a close family member died, and he became a mourner. And he asked Rabbi Ba Bar Cohen, who was with Rabbi Acha, whether a mourner may wash once after the burial. And Rabbi Ba Bar Cohen said to him, "Did not my teacher," this is Rabbi Yosei, "teach us this?" In other words, says the Gemara, that an incident occurred with Rabbi Ami in which he became a mourner, and he asked Rish Lakish whether a mourner may wash once after the burial. Gemara says that Rish Lakish ruled for him in accordance with the view of Rabbi Nassan, that basically that washing is going to be prohibited throughout the 7 days of mourning. And basically what we can see here is that from Rish Lakish's ruling to Rabbi Ami, we see that a mourner may not wash after the burial. Rabbi Rish Lakish was holding by Rabbi Nassan, who is the anonymous Mishneh. So he's not just holding by him because he agrees with his opinion. There's a deeper point here. This is the anonymous Mishneh. So there's something going on here. So what is going on here? I mean, Rabbi Ba Bar Cohen is basically, reminded Rabbi Yosef of the incident with Rabbi Ami, and he's pointing out that Rish Lakish ruled in accordance with Rabbi Nassan. And so this ends up looking to be very straightforward, and actually now ends up to be very mysterious, because we have here this case of the Mishneh, where the Mishneh is the anonymous ruling of the Mishneh is not going with the majority of the Tanna Kama. Very unusual. And what's going to be? So Rabbi Yossi is going to agree with the ruling. And he says to Rabbi Ba Bar Cohen, says the Gemara, indeed, perhaps there were two incidents which Rabbi Ami, there were two incidents with Rabbi Ami, and we recounted the incident concerning Rabbi Chia Barba, whereas you recounted the incident concerning Rish Lakish. So basically what this is saying is that there are two great authorities who ruled in accordance with Rabbi Nassan, and because of that, it would be sufficient to follow his view. That's basically the point of saying that there's two incidents. So I want to point out something that the Haredim writes to help us to understand this. He says about this incident that Rabbi Yossi remembered the incident as occurring with Rabbi Chia Barba, and that was originally cited in our Gemara. And Rabbi Ba Bar Kohen remembered it as having occurred with Rish Lakish, and to reconcile the different recollections, Rabbi Yossi suggested that Rabbi Ami may have asked his question on two separate occasions, once to Rabbi Chia Barba and once to Rish Lakish. Now, if that is true, then there are actually two great authorities who ruled in accordance with Rabbi Nassan, and that's the point of this Gemara, and that's what the Haredim is helping us to understand, is that it could have, what this Gemara is saying is that actually, according to what Rabbi Yossi is suggesting, is that Rabbi Ami had two cases where it occurred, and he asked two great authorities, and they both ruled in the anonymous Mishnah's way of Rabbi Nassan. Again, it's very interesting because normally things go by the Tanakama. So what is going on here? So Rabbi Yossi says the Haredim is reasoning that even if one would not give credence to the report of a single incident, one must certainly give credence to reports of two such incidents. And basically, it's two incidents with two different great authorities. So very, very unusual, very, very curious. So, the point is that in both cases, they're ruling stringently in accordance with the view of Rabbi Nassan. Now, that's a very, again, structurally curious thing because, again, you don't see these kinds of Mishnahs come up very often, where the anonymous Mishnah is going against the Tanakama, and now you have cases where, as what Rabbi Yossi is pointing out, is that they're ruling stringently in the way of Rabbi Nassan instead of by the Tanakama. This is a very curious thing, and this is a very unusual case, and that I think is why this is going to be in the Mishnah, and this is going to be something that's so important. I mean, when you get cases that are very straightforward, there's not much nuance and things. There's always nuance in Torah, but usually it's pretty easy for everybody to understand. What the Gemara is always very good at doing is getting these cases that are extremely unusual, and there's a beauty in that. So the Gemara continues and says, furthermore, from this following ruling too, we see that a mourner may not wash after the burial. For an incident occurred with Rabbi Chama, the father of Rabbi Oshaya, in which he became a mourner, and he asked the rabbis whether he is permitted to wash once after the burial, and they prohibited it. And basically what this is saying is that they're saying that their ruling is going to demonstrate even further that Rabbi Nassan's view is going to be authoritative. So I want to go back to the Haredim for some help on this. And he says that, he points out that had Rabbi Yossi known of this ruling when he asked the questions, he would have not have asked, for he would have been aware of two incidences in which the halacha followed Rabbi Nassan. We already just covered that. What the point here is that, says the Haredim, rather, Rabbi Yossi discovered this ruling of the rabbis only after the exchange with Rabbi Ba Bar Kohen. And the Gemara is informing us that once Rabbi Yossi became aware of this ruling, he cited it as further support of his decision to follow in favor of Rabbi Nassan's view. So that's another case where the rabbis themselves are actually ruling in this the way of the stricter opinion in the anonymous Mishneh of Rabbi Nassan. So very, very curious indeed. So having just talked about this ruling of the rabbis, the Gemara now is going to be raising a question, because I know that you also have a lot of questions on this because, again, of the unusualness of this. Rabbi Yossi inquired, says the Gemara, who are these rabbis? In other words, who said this? And Gemara continues and says, are they the rabbis of here, of the north of Israel, or are they the rabbis of the south? Now, I want to point out that any time in the Yerushalmi Shas that is talking about the rabbis of the north or the rabbis of the south, it's always going to be a case where the rabbis of the north are better at halacha, know more, better scholars, and the rabbis and the rulings of the south are much lighter, much never given the same weight, so that there's always going to be a more seriousness given to the rulings of the rabbis of the north of Israel. Ultimately, the Sanhedrin was there for a period of time, and the scholarship all moved up there. And the rabbis that were left in the south, which is basically Jerusalem at that time, the level of scholarship was not the same. So they want to know, when you're talking about the rabbis, which rabbis? You're talking about the ones in the north, where if they were ruling that way, that would be a really serious matter. I mean, that's really like, the Gedolim of the day saying, hey, this is what it is. Or is it going to be the rabbis of the south, which, while they are sages, their rulings are not given much weight at all? Who is saying this? And the Gemara is going to say that if you will say they are the rabbis of here, of the north, as well, okay. I mean, basically it's saying that, that means one thing, right? The Gemara continues, says, but if you will say that they are the rabbis of the south, it is possible, says the Gemara, that the great sages are before him here in the north, and Rabbi Chama asks the question to the lesser sages of the south. In other words, they want to know that, basically what happened here, okay, is that the sages that you have in the south are not really held in very high esteem by the Amorim in the Yerushalmi. This is always going to be the case, okay? They want to know, when the rabbis rule this way, which rabbis are you talking about? Are you talking about the ones in the north, or are you talking about the ones in the south, for which they don't really have very much esteem for? It's not that they don't like them personally, it's just that the level of scholarship is not nearly the same as in the north. Don't forget, in the later parts of the Yerushalmi and later Amorim, the great commentaries that are here by, like, Rabbi Hanina or by Rabbi Mana, these are going to be from the Academy of Sipori, and that's going to be up in the north near Tiberias. And this is really where the scholarship moved to. And so you don't see at that period of time very much from any academy in Jerusalem at all in those later parts of the Yerushalmi, and also even in earlier parts where you're having like Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, and in that earlier period of time, a few hundred years earlier, there's also a different level in scholarship. So the Gemara continues, says, further, if you'll say that these are the rabbis of the south, can these rabbis permit washing and these same rabbis forbid washing? And the Gemara says that a Beraisa had taught, in a place where it is the custom to wash mourners after the Beur is buried, we may wash them, and in the south they do indeed wash the mourners immediately after the burial. So one of the points here is that we can see here that from the way this Gemara is written, that the rabbis of the south would permit a mourner to perform a single washing, and if these same rabbis were the ones who ruled for Rabbi Chama that washing would be prohibited throughout 7 days of mourning, then they actually just end up contradicting themselves. So if it were the rabbis who issued the ruling for Rabbi Chama, so therefore, the rabbis of the south are not going to be contradicting themselves. So it must have been the rabbis of the north who ruled for Rabbi Chama, not of the south. In other words, the rabbis of the south have a custom that you can wash once, and that the rabbis of the north don't hold that. So the Gemara now is going to explain the view of those who permit a mourner to wash after burial. In other words, it's going to ask a good question. What basically are the sages of the south saying when you can wash once? What's the point? Because this indeed is very different from what the greater scholarship in the north is saying. So what is the argument of the south? Why would that become a custom? And what was their point for it? Now, one of the key points to keep in mind that comes up in Sachim in the Yerushalmi is that if you have a custom that is a valid custom halachically, and it is the custom of a place, and again, only if it's valid halachically, that can become the custom. But if it's not valid halachically, then it can be overturned, because a ruling that is not valid halakhically really has no weight at all. And that is also going to be the case in the real world today. People who make halachic statements that are not bound in halacha said nothing at all. It's no different than somebody saying something about a mundane thing, and it has no weight at all. So the Gemara now wants to get into what basically is going to be the view of what happened with the sages of the south, that they said this. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Avin, said, this, by the way, is a different Rabbi Yossi than who we were talking about. There was a different Amorah Rabbi Yossi from this Amorah Rabbi Yossi. And the Gemara says that the one who permits this washing treats it like eating and drinking, which is certainly permitted during the mourning period. So I want to point out the Ramban on this. The Ramban has a really great insight. He says that the purpose behind washing the mourner after the burial is to remove any foulness that may have clung to him from the dead body, and to remove the evil spirit and tuma that comes upon a person through contact with the dead. When you come in contact with the dead and you physically touch the dead, the dead body is the avatuma. Okay, so you can't, get rid of your tuma immediately after. Even if you go to the mikveh, 10 minutes later, you can't get rid of it. You have to, if you touch that, you have to wait a 7-day period of time. And that's but there's still this evil spirit that comes to rest on a person through contact of the dead. And the Ramban, this is Rabbi Nachmanides, the Ramban, not Rambam, Ramban, says that those who permit such washing consider it to be vitally important to the mourner's well-being. Thus, this first washing is comparable to food and drink. And just as a mourner is permitted to these basic necessities of life, so too he is permitted a single washing, because this is considered a basic necessity. So that's the insight about how this would work for the ruling of the South. And Rabban Gamliel would be justified of having washed by saying that he's of delicate nature. So what's happening here is, you could say, well, wait a second. Is Rabban Gamliel going to be following the sages of the South? Surely not, because Rabban Gamliel is a great scholar, and he would be following the opinion of the sages of the North. So what's happening here is that Rabban Gamliel would agree with the ruling of the sages in the North, but he's giving a different reason for why he can wash. Now, Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Avin, is pointing out that the ruling of the rabbis of the South is going to be because it's going to be like a necessity. It's going to be a basic necessity. And that's the insight by the Ramban. Rabban Gamliel's point is a little bit different, okay? And that's going to be the whole point of why his point is put into the Mishnah and not the opinion of the rabbis of the South. The Gemara says that which you say that a mourner is forbidden to wash throughout the 7 days is stated with regards to washing for pleasure. But in the case of washing that is not for pleasure, all agree that it is permitted, as is this incident that occurred with Shmuel bar Abba. Gemara says that boils sprouted on his body during the 7 days of mourning, and he wanted to bathe to basically alleviate the pain of the boils. Gemara says that they came and they asked Rabbi Yasa, what is the law with regard to whether he may wash? And he said to them, if he does not wash, he will die. Basically saying, basically what that means is, yeah, of course he can wash, right? So the Haredim points out that Rabbi Yasa did not literally mean that Rabbi Shmuel bar Abba would die or that he was even in danger, because obviously Pekuach Nefesh, everybody knows that, right? It's not a Pekuach Nefesh thing. It's only a figurative statement. He's basically saying that he would suffer a lot of pain. And the Haredim says that people often say that they are dying when all they mean is that they're in pain. And the Haredim points out that, as an example, the matriarch Rachel said to Yaakov Avinu regarding her fear that she would remain barren, where she says, I will surely die. And basically, the Haredim points out that she's describing her suffering as death. So that's an explanation of this. This is not a literal thing, and you shouldn't be reading it to understand that Shmuel bar Abba is literally in danger. Although there are some commentators who do read it that way. But I think that I like the explanation by the Haredim that it's a figure of speech and that it's to alleviate the suffering and pain. Gemara says that indeed, if he wishes, he may wash even on Tish B'Av. That's the 9th of Av. The Gemara says that if he wishes, he may even wash on Yom Kippur, since he is not washing for pleasure. So there is a prohibition for washing on Yom Kippur, and there is a prohibition of washing on Tisha B'Av, but this is just for pleasure. That's the point of what this Gemara is saying. And so that really what they're saying is that this is really a necessity for stopping the suffering. So what's going on here is that we see here with Rabban Gamliel, the purpose of his washing is not going to be for pleasure, but it's going to be really to alleviate discomfort and some sort of pain or discomfort that he's having. That act is going to be permitted, and it's definitely not for pleasure. But again, this is a little bit different than saying it's a necessity like eating or drinking. You can see there's a difference. Eating and drinking, that's not really for pleasure either for a lot of people, or a lot of cases you do it because you have to do it. And it can be also where you were just at the graveyard, you're handling the body, and you have to just wash yourself. It's no different. And over here, this is a different. The orbit of this argument is a little bit different, because this is saying no. This is now not a thing of like, oh, you're grossed out by having touched a dead body and you want to bathe yourself, and it's no different than a necessity like having to drink water. This is saying that no, you're actually having a lot of suffering and discomfort, and this is actually just to alleviate that. Not really the same thing, and that's why Rabban Gamliel's argument is going to be in the Mishnah, and again, not the argument of the sages of the South, but we do want to know what the opinion of the sages of the South is. Gemara is going to introduce a related question as to whether the mourner is allowed to bathe in cold water. Gemara says that it occurred with Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Hanina. This, by the way, is another Amara Rabbi Yossi, not the last two Rabbi Yossis who were Amarim. This is a new one. The Gemara says that they saw him immersing in a mikvah during his 7 days of mourning, and we do not know whether he immersed on account of the tuma of a seminal emission, in which case, the reason for immersion is going to be permitted is that it was performed as a mitzvah, but not for pleasure. And so one of the things with a seminal emission would be that he becomes tamei, and that he has to go to a mikvah, and that he gets purified at nightfall. So, one of the things that we know about from other Gemaras is that until you get purified, you're not allowed to speak words of Torah. You're not allowed to learn a lot of Torah things that you'd be interested in, and you're also limited on your ability to pray. So they don't know whether during that 7-day period of mourning, it was from that, which by the way is a mitzvah, right? So the act of trying to become tahor is a mitzvah, and so in the performance of a mitzvah, that's not going to be the performance of an act of pleasure. The Gemara continues, says that we do not know whether he immersed to cool his body, because he holds that washing with cold water is not washing, so it is permitted for washing. In other words, that they observed him basically immersing, they're just not sure which reason. In other words, if he's going in cool water to cool his body, then that's going to be a thing where he's also kind of, he's not taking pleasure from washing in a very cold pool of water. And that's definitely, not the degree of pleasure like you would have for eating meat and drinking wine. You're also, it's a different kind of experience when you go into a freezing cold pool of water to wash. And it's not, the question is going to be, is that going to be washing or not? So I want to point out what the Haredim is saying about this. Those who observed the immersion of Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, were not certain of the purpose. That's clear from the Gemara. They're not sure it's this or that. He may have intended to purify himself of the tuma of a seminal mission. And going and purifying yourself, that's going to be a mitzvah. So you're allowed to go do a mitzvah. And again, doing a mitzvah doesn't necessarily have to be pleasurable, right? So the reason why is not a thing of pleasure, it's a thing of a mitzvah. Or, says the Haredim, that, accordingly, we cannot prove from this action that a mourner, may bathe in cold water. And if Rabbi Yosef, son of Rabbi Hanina, immersed in order to cool his body, he, this would, stand as proof that a mourner may wash with cold water. But, we know that in Bavli Tanis 13a, that Rashi is saying that although a person does derive pleasure from washing with cold water, that level of pleasure is akin to the pleasure of eating meat and drinking wine. And just as the mourner is permitted to eat meat and drink wine, so too he's permitted to drink to bathe with cold water, to wash with cold water. And alternatively, washing, says the Rosh Cirilio, that washing with cold water would not be regarded as pleasurable in the least, but as merely as a practical means to remove dirt and grime, and that would be the reason why it would be permitted. Now, Bnei Moshe says that our Gemara does not reach a conclusion regarding the question of whether a mourner does not may wash with cold water. And again, always check the Shulchan Aruch for the ruling that everybody agrees with. So the Gemara is going to cite a further ruling concerning washing that's not performed for pleasure. Rabbi Ba ruled in accordance with this certain Baraisa that states that a traveler may cross a river on Yom Kippur even if the water reaches his neck, and may bathe his feet on Yom Kippur if they become dirty. So we see that a parallel that from the Bavli in Berechot 13a and b, where it's talking about a different kind of question, where it's talking about whether you're allowed to wash the entire body. And by the way, it says that you can't, but it's talking about, well, what about just your hands and your feet? And it's concluding that you can. This is again in cold water. So the argument here and the conversation here in the Gemara here is going to be slightly different. The than the Gemara over there. And the Gemara gives another ruling and says that Rabbi Acha ruled regarding one who arrives from a journey on Yom Kippur and his feet hurt him, they pain him, and the Gemara says that he is permitted to bathe with water. So the cases here are a little bit different than the cases in the Bavli. And in fact, they may not be disagreeing with the Bavli at all, but just talking about different cases. Now, Rosh Cirilio points out that in the Bavli, in Tanis 13b, states that one is always permitted to wash one's feet with cold water in Yom Kippur, even if he suffers no discomfort. And possibly Rabbi Acha means to permit the person to wash even in hot water, in which case his ruling accords with the Bavli. So a lot of times it looks like they may be disagreeing, but when you actually are looking at the arguments in depth, you can see a lot of times there's no disagreement. The way they're approaching it might be different, or they might be talking about different nuances in the argument. So the Gemara comes along and is talking about, this thing about mourners being forbidden to wear shoes. The Gemara is going to cite a brisa about shoes when they are not worn for pleasure. So a brisa was taught, says the Gemara, that if a mourner and somebody who is excommunicated were traveling on the way, they are permitted to wear shoes, but when they come to town, they must remove their shoes, and so too on Tisha B'Av, and so too on a public fast. So the note here from the Sidei Yeshua, who is a great commentator from the 1650s from Turkey, says that both mourners and people excommunicated are forbidden to wear shoes. However, this applies only in a city where shoes are not a necessity. On a journey where shoes are not worn for pleasure but to protect the feet, they are permitted. And therefore, a mourner traveling a distance on foot may wear shoes, but not while walking in or near town. So that's going to be what they're talking about over here. So now we're talking about the mourning practices of the South. We're going to get back to the mourning practices of the South. And the Gemara says that a brisa was taught in a place where it is accustomed to greet mourners on the Sabbath, we may greet them. And in the South, they do indeed greet mourners on the Sabbath. Again, if you have, says Yerushalmi Pesachim, if you have a custom that is halachically legitimate, and it doesn't contradict anything in the halacha, and there's a real reason for why it is, you can't just overturn it. But if you have a custom that is not grounded in halacha, then it's not a custom at all, and you're not liable to keep it. So the question, is going to be about, greeting a mourner, because, greetings do give some degree of pleasure, and, it's going to be, a thing about happening on, Shabbos. So, there's a Tosefta in Sachim, chapter 3:11, about these customs, and it's concluding that in a place where it is a practice not to greet mourners on the Sabbath, we may not greet them, and those who follow that view hold that there is observance of mourning on the Sabbath. So that's going to be part of the question is, what degree of, mourning is there on the Sabbath, and that's why, this Tosefta is going to be there. So the Gemara now is going to talk about an incident concerning a person who did greet mourners on the Sabbath. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Hoshaya the Great went to a certain place, and he saw mourners on the Sabbath, and he greeted them. And he said to them, I do not know the custom of your place, whether you greet mourners on the Sabbath or not. However, peace be upon you as per the custom of your place. So basically, what's going on here, again, Sachim chapter 4, halacha 1, is that if a person from a strange place goes to another place, he's required to follow the practices of the places he's visiting. Now, this Gemara is teaching that you have a case where somebody who doesn't know the local practice. That's the point of this Gemara. And, he may follow his own custom as long as he's announcing that he's acting out of ignorance for the local custom. So basically, the brilliance of Rabbi Hoshaya the Great is that he says, peace be upon you as per the custom of your place, basically meaning that, hey, if the custom is not to do it, then disregard it. And if the custom is to do it, then please accept it. So you can see here the nuance of Rabbi Hoshaya the Great and how he's doing this greeting so that he's staying consistent with it. Now we get into another incident concerning somebody who greeted the mourners on the Sabbath. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Chalafta, praised Rabbi Meir before residents of Sippori. And he said, he is a great man, a holy man, a modest man. And the Gemara relates what happened next. The Gemara says that one time Rabbi Meir saw the mourners of the south, and he greeted them. In other words, that one time, they saw Rabbi Meir. There's other people that saw Rabbi Meir greeting mourners on the south, basically. So Gemara says that basically after seeing this, we're talking about the residents of Sippori, and they're going to be protesting to Rabbi Yosef, son of Rabbi Chalafta. This is talking about Tanayim, by the way. So they said to him, says the Gemara, this is he who praises you, relate. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yossi said to them, what impropriety have you detected regarding Rabbi Meir that you object to my words of praise? And they said to him, he saw mourners on the Shabbos, and he greeted them, which is prohibited. And Rabbi Yossi said to them, do you wish to learn what is his strength, in other words, his source for this? So when they're saying, do you wish to learn what is his strength, they're saying, what is his argument for this? And the Gemara is saying that, continues with this act, he comes to inform you that there is no observance of mourning on the Shabbos. So, we had a question about whether there is an observance of mourning on Shabbos or not. That's a matter of dispute, by the way. And there are some who hold that a public display of mourning is going to be forbidden on Shabbos, and that the laws of mourning do apply with regard to a private expression of mourning. Then there's the other opinion, which says that there is no observance of mourning whatsoever on the Shabbos, even with regard to a private expression of mourning. So that's going to be a malochet, and Rabbi Meir held the latter view, that, therefore, when he's doing this greeting, he's not greeting a mourner in a private expression of mourning, since others are unaware of one's reasons from refraining. Rabbi Meir basically is extending his greeting to the mourner because he's basically holding the opinion that even a private act of mourning is going to be forbidden on the Shabbos. So basically, he was teaching the law to the people of Sippori that there is no observance of mourning on the Shabbos. It's basically what's going on over here. Now, the Gemara continues, says, this is the meaning of what is written. It is the blessing of Hashem that enriches. This is a reference to the blessing of Shabbos. So this is in Proverbs 10:22, and I want to point out what the Rashi over in his commentary in Berechot is saying about something that's similar. He's saying that simply understood, over here in the Proverbs, it's teaching that the wealth comes through God's blessing, not through man's hard work and toil. And basically what we see here is that the Gemara is trying to connect the verse over here from Proverbs and over here in Bereshit. That's going to be a statement in Bereshit in chapter 2, Pasuk 3, where it's going to say that, and God blessed the seventh day, and that the the seventh is going to be blessed with a double portion of manna. We see that also come up, and that basically says the Rashi that on that day a person is blessed with an additional soul. So we see here that where it's saying that this is a reference to the blessing of Shabbos. Then the Gemara is going to continue. It says that this verse continues and says, and one should not add sadness to it, to the Shabbos. And the Gemara says that this is a reference to mourning. So the Rashi points out that it interprets etzev as toil, and accordingly that segment of the verse teaches that the ultimate source of wealth is not man's toil and hard work, but actually is going to be the blessing of Hashem. And the Gemara is going to be talking about etzev as sadness, and this is going to explain that the mourning has no place on the Sabbath. So the Gemara continues, says, as it is stated with regards to King David's mourning of his son Avshalom, the Gemara says that the king is saddened over his son. That's in Shmuel 19:3 and Shmuel 2. And basically what we see here is that that regarding King David, we see that the word sadness, etzev, refers to mourning. And thus, when the verse in Proverbs is stating that there should be no sadness on the Shabbos, it's teaching that there is no observance of mourning on that day, and therefore the Tana Rabbi Meir held that it is permitted to greet the mornings on the Shabbos. Now, tomorrow we're going to be getting into Halacha 8, which is talking about Rabban Gamliel's slave who passed away, and we're going to be getting into themes about concentration with regards to things while we're mourning, and this is all coming up, and we're going to bounce back and forth between these themes about the groom, because that's going to be in Halacha 9, and then we're talking about other cases of distress and concentration, but this is not out of place, and that is trying to set a context for what is going to be mourning, so that we can start to understand in terms of mitzvah observance. Because again, there's a time to laugh and there's a time to cry, and so you have times for both. But regardless of that, you still have to observe. The question is how. Have a great day.